Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Coast-to-Coast Combat Hour, brought to you by AllAccessMMA.com. I'm your host, Matthew Hawkins, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Ed Carbajal. Ed, man, some action, not the greatest action. The biggest news this week seems to be potential fights. But before we get into that, how you doing out there on the East Coast?
All right. I mean, it's I got the door open again because it's actually pleasant. So we get a few weeks of pleasant weather before we get like a week or two of fall, and then winter drops right the fuck in. So, yeah, I'm doing good, man. I mean, um, like you said about the news, man. I mean, it's a lot of what ifs and who we'd like to see, but it looks like everybody wants to see the Beast Incarnate back in action in MMA.
Yeah, I mean that's the news that apparently broke the other day is that Brock Lesnar is now a free agent after his contract with the WWE expired. I was definitely taken back a little bit by the news because I've always been under the impression, and obviously apparently wrong, that he had his WWE contract, but I always thought he also had like a UFC contract. So I do find it. I found it strange that the UFC contract also expired, but perhaps he doesn't have them simultaneously at the same time, and he just keeps bouncing back and forth. So I was definitely surprised by it. I didn't think we'd ever see him back in MMA, but I mean, I don't think it's a huge percentage. I'd say we're at like 20% chance if we're being serious about it, but
Yeah, I mean,
definitely brings some talk.
no, but I feel like I remember seeing or hearing somewhere along the lines that when because the last time we heard he was coming back was supposed to be against Daniel Cormier, and then one of the things that happened around that time was the ESPN Plus deal was relatively new, and people were kicking it around about how the paywall and how the pay per view structure works, and so one of the things I remember hearing, I don't remember where, it was probably just rumor or social media rumor, but that one of the reasons why that never happened was because Brock Lesnar saw that the pay per view buys or however they would get money off of that would be different in the contract because of the way it happens through ESPN Plus. So he was kind of like, well, how the hell do I make money off of you guys now? Because he can just show up and draw and make a lot of money, but if pay per view buys were included, but so I mean that's the last I heard. If he does come back to MMA, I don't know if that's still a thing because looks like that's been lucrative now since since that initially happened. So I don't know. I mean, there's talk of him, going back to the UFC, or the speculation him going back to the UFC. Like Scott Coker has expressed interest in a him versus Fedor fight, which I know you want to chime in on. But I don't know, man. I mean, I'm with you. I don't see him really wanting to come back, especially with the options that are out there for him right now.
Well, I think there's a few factors at play. I think that he's a natural competitor. I mean, very few people would go do what he did in college and try out for the NFL. Eventually, you get to the UFC and not only get there, but fight some really, really good competition and become the champion, defend the belt. Um, skill wise, he's not the most skilled champion. He's a big, strong, great wrestler. But I think now I mean, I imagine the itch is there. If your contract ends up and you start hearing talk, and it's not like he's got bums calling him out. He ain't coming in here to build his way up the ladder. If he shows up, regardless of his history of uh, some drug tests and his history of his record in general, maybe not being deserving of a shot. But you got guys like John Jones, you know, you haven't heard Stipe necessarily call him out, but I think that Stipe would certainly jump at that. I wouldn't be shocked if Cormier came out of retirement for the fight if it was offered to him. Although he did go on it was Ariel's show yesterday, or I think the day before, and basically close the chapter on his career. I think all that can change. These guys are super competitive.
Oh
I,
yeah,
my thing is that he's 43 years old, and right now we don't really know. Although fans I notice fans are being allowed to the drag races in Vegas in October. The drag race world championship. My boss goes to that, and he's actually bought tickets, and they're selling tickets online for that event. So although it is outdoors, maybe we're getting closer to having fans in some kind of capacity. We talked about Connor not fighting in front of a crowd. I don't think there's any chance in hell Brock signs to fight without a
Mm.
crowd, without a gate. So I guess what I'm saying is, even if he signed tomorrow with the UFC, went through a couple months of the mandatory USADA testing, uh, realistically, we could still be a year away from him being able to fight in an arena full of fans and actually create that buzz and money that's there. So that's where it seems kind of strange to me, and might actually hold up it happening. Um, the WWE thing makes the most sense just to stick there. But I don't know what WWE also seems like they've kind of moved past a little bit him being the champion, and I don't watch a ton of the pro wrestling anymore, but it just seems like they've kind of moved to a younger, more athletic, smaller, you know, uh, kind of wrestling promotion.
Well, maybe
I
he
don't
goes
know.
to AEW, which seems to be more like it seems to be drawing better. I mean, it's got a good mix of old school and new school. I wouldn't be surprised if that's an option for him. If they, I mean, because they actually made TV Guide's top 100 must watch TV with everything going on because of the pandemic. You know, they've like MMA, they've been moving forward. They've held all their events in Jacksonville since the UFC was in Jacksonville. So that's an option for him too. But I mean, I don't know, man. I mean, we might as well play with the idea of devil's advocate. I don't know who you would like to see him. I tweeted at Dana White because I'm sure he watches my tweets, but I tweeted at him earlier because I mean, there's all this talk of Brock Lesnar versus John Jones, which is fine and dandy. I'm sure that'd be a draw. But what about Brock Lesnar versus Francis Ngannou? I mean, I feel like that's actually kind of an even matchup given Ngannou's doesn't deal too well with wrestlers, and Brock Lesnar being I mean, I guess anyone would be afraid to get punched by Ngannou, but you know what I mean? Like he's always been kind of he's always been thrown off his game against strikers, which is why when he fought Mark Hunt was such a big deal because Mark Hunt was a well-known striker. So I don't know. I mean, that was just off the top of my head when I was thinking about what we were going to record tonight. So I don't know if you had any dream matchups or potential bouts that you'd like to see him in as a
Well,
heavyweight.
okay, so the AEW thing makes a lot of sense to me, just to start there, because that seems
Mhm.
like a natural progression. I'm not sure what his relationship with WWE is. If they're ready to move on, uh, then that would make a lot of sense. He could go in there and kind of be their franchise and stuff. So I think that's a high possibility. If he goes to the UFC now, obviously everybody's talking John Jones. I fall in kind of your same category here. The Nagano uh, Lesnar fight is like the freak show world circus fight of the decade. You
Yeah,
know, I mean that's the fight that really
some
makes me
pride
go, oh,
fight. Yeah, some pride level.
exactly,
So yeah.
exactly. It's a pride level fight. The Jones fight is interesting because we've never seen Jones at heavyweight. Jones doesn't have huge legs, so a double leg in on him could be interesting. We've never seen Jones on the bottom of any kind of ground and pound or on the bottom. He's
Mhm.
never seen him off his back, really.
Yeah.
I can't recall a moment ever of him on his back. So we don't know how even though he's this great all-time martial artist, we don't know exactly how he reacts. All these scenarios create different kind of reactions out of fighters as far as how they get out. Does he have the jujitsu to shrimp out or hold guard against a Lesnar? Does he, if he starts tasting his own blood Lesnar hits him with an elbow and rips his skull open? Do we, you know what I mean? There's a lot of options there, so that makes it interesting. But the Ngannou fight, the Cormier fight, although Cormier, like I said he retired, that's also kind of a fight that I find interesting just because it's two older dudes.
Mm.
Kind of got the pro wrestling spin on it. Um, but the Ngannou fight is the circus. That's the fight where it's like you said, it's the pride fight. It's either Lesnar gets knocked out real quick or he puts a beating on Ngannou um, on the ground for God knows how many minutes. So that's the one that I would like in the UFC. Now, let's say he goes to Bellator. Uh, I think the Emelianenko fight is obviously the fight that would likely be made. Um, but I flirted with this idea. We're kind of, Bellator obviously kind of has the reputation of having some of the old dudes, and they have a pretty good stable of old dude heavyweights. What do you think about like an 8-man Grand Prix with Fedor, Brock, Mark Hunt, Verdun, Barnett, Karatanov, maybe Arlovsky and Olenek if they end up getting released from the UFC? All those guys are over the age of 40. You really could do like an over 40. I mean, you could throw Roy Nelson in there too, although he's not been successful lately. But if you just wanted to kind of have like a, you could do Arlovsky or you could do Mitrione, Roy Nelson too as an alternate fight for that tournament. You
Well,
know,
yeah, Roy Nelson actually said he wants that as his last fight, and another one against Mitrione. I mean, I guess that's good as long as they don't do it in Mohegan Sun, because I mean they keep throwing poor
for Roy. But
yeah,
but
yeah.
I'm just saying, like, there's a potential. Even if you just did a 4-man tournament, you know that if in theory they signed Lesnar, you'd have
No, look,
Lesnar. You'd
not
have
for nothing. I'm impressed with how you came up with that tournament just off the top of your head. We didn't even talk about it before
Yeah, no,
recording.
I mean they've
That's a
got
nice that's a nice little
it's a nice little card too, and and
yeah.
and and you'd feel got got to figure guys like Olenek and Arlovsky are definitely on their last run in the UFC. Olenek been a little more successful, but he is coming off now a loss, and he's they've kind of peaked out. So you potentially could throw together a hell of a tournament, even if you just had who they have under contract right now and did a Barnett Verdun on one side of the bracket, let's say, and then on the other side of the bracket you did Fedor versus Brock. I mean, you talk about a 4-man, and I'm not saying this is for the Bellator Heavyweight Championship. I'm not trying to sell these guys as better than Minakov or maybe even Sergey Karatanov or Ryan Bader, maybe for that matter at heavyweight. But I just think for the nostalgia, and you want to talk a moneymaker. I mean, what about Couture? I mean, I know that sounds crazy. He's 50 something probably now,
Nah,
but
yeah, he had that heart thing. Nah.
okay, yeah, you're right. You're right.
Yeah.
So he falls out of it, but
But
there is.
that what about I mean I know he's getting the push over I think at WWE now, but I mean I know folks had always toyed around with Bobby Lashley versus Brock, and Lashley's had a pretty good career at Bellator too. I was kind of like what the WTF when he stopped fighting there, because I mean I thought he was I thought he was a pretty decent heavyweight, not just a fighter, but a decent heavyweight there, and would have been good for the promotion. But maybe he was too expensive. I don't know.
Yeah, I think he probably makes good money doing pro wrestling. I don't know, and he was good at MMA, but he was a little stiff. I think there was a time. I think his reckoning day was coming. I think somebody was gonna put his lights out eventually if he kept working his way up the ladder and got into some of these heavy strikers. But the odds came out on a lot of these fights. If they were to happen,
Yeah.
basically they had Brock basically as the same odds as Cormier when he fought Jones at UFC 214. They're both basically like plus 280, give or take a little bit, underdogs. So I thought that was a little shocking. They had Brock as a slight favorite over Fedor, but basically an even money fight. Fedor
Hmm.
was the underdog at like plus 105, so essentially even money. And I think Brock was minus 130. Very little on the favorite thing. So they basically calling that fight a coin flip. I mean, it's a fun fight. Um, I don't, but I don't know. I mean, it sounds crazy that we're talking about it because it's probably not going to happen, and
You
it is
never
Brock's,
know.
and but I see people like trying to criticize others for being excited about the potential, and I just I shake my head a little bit because we both come from an older school era where it's like, and when we first started doing this show, I think one of the very first things you told me is like, we're not going to take this shit too seriously. We're talking about dudes getting in a cage
Yeah.
and fighting. You know what
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean? And you said that at least once or twice to me, off camera, and it's the same thing for me. MMA has always been fun. It's always been kind of finding out who's the best fighter against so and so, and I don't care if a guy's 50, I don't care if a guy's 40. If they're capable and they're healthy enough to fight and they get
And they
cleared
want to do it. Yeah.
and they want to do it, then shit, bring it on. I mean, I just wish we had crowds, because if we had crowds, so much of this could be potential. I mean,
But
we'd be
that and
talking.
that and I think that would be such a more of a factor in helping something happening. If they knew they could get a sell out an arena or someplace, then obviously you'd have people throwing money at Lesnar. Come here, come here, come here. I mean, we don't even know, because Lesnar doesn't do a lot of media. He doesn't do a lot of interviews. He probably maybe he just wants to sit at home and be on his ranch and work out in that barn or whatever the hell he used to train in for that he had built for MMA. But you know what I mean? Like, I mean, who says that he even wants to continue to do anything? Maybe he's getting tired. I mean, 40s is especially for any type of combat sport, it's old.
Yeah, no, I mean it's getting up there, but he doesn't have a lot of mileage on him for fighting either. I mean, you're talking about a guy who doesn't have 60 fights. He's not the Overeem, So you don't know what I mean. He had the I don't even know how to say it.
The
The
Vicular Titus or what?
there you
Yeah,
go. He had the stomach disease. So that obviously took some time and wear on his body. But let me throw this out there, and this is like Hail Mary crazy talk. Uh, we've heard Tyson Fury be interested in MMA. What if is it DAZN that owns Tyson Fury? Who owns his rights? If somebody came up with $10 million guaranteed for Brock to fight Tyson Fury on I mean in the world we live in right now, it just seems like anything like that is possible.
yeah.
And so I don't know. I mean, now that we think about it, I mean, how fun would that be? you
Yeah.
know, could you imagine some chaotic scene with But again, it all revolves around fans in the crowd for me, because that's where the
Yeah.
excitement like builds. Because we would be talking right now, like you'd start hearing rumors. Oh well, is he going to show up in a couple weeks at the Bellator? If it was a Mohegan had 15,000 in the crowd, and that's kind of how you sneak guys in. You do these announcements, and somebody comes walking down the ramp and stuff. But and that goes for most of these promotions, or you get some kind of big in arena announcement. I just don't feel like it's the same. So it'll
I
be
mean,
interesting.
there's a lot going on in boxing that I mean, Tyson Fury already. I mean, he's with Top Rank PBC, I believe, but um, the zone Eddie Hearn, who's the zone promoter, said that he's already kind of got the Anthony Joshua Tyson Fury lined up for next year. So I doubt some exhibition with Brock Lesnar would I mean, if it
Money
makes dollars,
talks.
it makes sense. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
it's like if every time we talk about stuff like this and how it couldn't happen, I always think back to Dana White when he had to do the media rounds for Mayweather McGregor after for years saying it wasn't going to happen. One of the things he said, I think it was on the Tonight Show with Kimmel or one of those people. He was like, "Well, it's too lucrative now for it not to happen." And that's like the most honest thing to say when for something like this. I mean, people didn't care that that was McGregor's first boxing match, his first pro boxing match. They just wanted to see it and look at all the money it made, and people still talk about it. Every freaking that was 2017. You'll still see the tweets go out. It's been a year, 2 years since this happened, and we see the pro poster, and there's even talk about them doing it again.
Yeah.
So
No, I mean, and I guess that's a perfect example of anything's possible. And I, like I said, it's a Hail Mary. It was just something that popped into my head while we were just talking about it. But Fury has talked about coming in. It all
yeah,
it, it
he's in the UFC game. I downloaded him, and he won.
well, and then, you mentioned
So,
Dana White, and we both know Dana White's pretty vindictive and doesn't like to be shown up very very at all. Um, that's where I have a hard time believing Brock ends up in Bellator, because if Bellator were to make, although it's 10 years too late, if
yeah,
they were to make Fedor versus Brock, and let's say it turned into something like a really good fight, or something where it was promoted, and I mean, how if you're ESPN and stuff, how do you ignore that? I mean, I guess they do, because they ignore Bellator, but for the most, I mean, it seems like it wouldn't be as easy to do if it was Brock. So, in my opinion, I think it's either he stays in pro wrestling, or the UFC gives them a giant chunk of money, because I think they would basically overpay him threefold to make sure that he doesn't end up in Bellator. One of these days, one of these big signings, all it has to do is create enough buzz, and you get a huge fight down, and all of a sudden you've just created a huge group of fans that maybe didn't watch Bellator before. You get the pro wrestling fans, you get a bunch of the Brock fans
well,
that
yeah,
tune in.
that's the whole thing with these cross promotion with even with Mayweather McGregor, Brock versus anyone. CM Punk when they brought him in, it's this other fan base you're tapping into, then you're bringing in more eyeballs. So that's one of the reasons. The other thing, I mean, I don't think that. I think the only reason UFC is more likely than Bellator is not for anything negative against Bellator. It's just obviously has a history with dealing with Dana White in the UFC. So that it's just easier for them to have conversations to make things happen. Only thing I mean, you worry about. Well, obviously, the pandemic hit everybody financially in one way or another, and I know. So deciding where they spend money, I'm talking about the UFC, is going to be an issue if Brock Lesnar wants a lot. I mean, you look at earlier when John Jones was complaining about not getting paid his worth and all these other fighters, and then now they're building that a UFC hotel near the Apex to house fighters, which logistically makes sense because you don't know how long this situation is going to be. So if you just make your bubble safer by having a fighter hotel for them to stay in, I think that's a good investment. But with they're signing all these new fighters to where right now one of the reasons why we haven't had that many people chime in on Tuesday nights is because Contender Series is on right now,
Yeah.
and uh, you know, tonight there's going to be another X amount of contracts, signed for with new fighters. And then we saw not too long ago that there's certain fighters that if they weren't ranked like in the top 15, top 20, they got let go. Like Beth Correa and I forget a couple other names got let go from the UFC because they have to make they have to use their money for these newer guys, and it's cheaper for them to sign these newer guys and build them, let them build their worth in the UFC and build a name and bring in fans and stuff. So who knows if they want to spend Brock Lesnar money? You know what I mean?
Well, you bring up the hotel and all that stuff, and that's another point with Lesnar. He doesn't seem like the kind of dude who's just going to go into a quarantine to fight. I mean, you know what I mean? Like he's always kind of been like,
Yeah, you're
and
right.
maybe behind the scenes that's not how he is, but publicly it seems like he's kind of not somebody to necessarily roll with the punches and go hang out in a hotel for 14 days before his fight and all this other stuff that yeah, maybe not 14 days, but whatever they do with all their drug testing. I just don't see Brock falling for that in a situation, especially where he doesn't have a crowd. Uh, I mean, he's a pro wrestler. That's what they do. Pro wrestlers main I mean, a pro wrestler's main thing is getting the crowd over on, getting the crowd to getting over on the crowd. So,
Yeah,
um, it's not necessarily how good you are as pro wrestler; it's how good you convince the crowd you're good. You are. So there's that. God, there was another Bellator thing. Oh, Bellator. Now we talk about money, and again, we get back to a Emelianenko fight. We're talking about them transferring to CBS Sports Network right now, coming up after September 12th.
yeah.
If you wanted to send shockwaves through the MMA world and have your first event on CBS, Brock Lesnar versus Fedor
Somebody.
Emelianenko
Yeah.
does a lot of views on CBS. I mean, keep in mind, like uh, Fedor versus Rogers did like 4.5 million. That's a number that's like 3 times, 4 times almost what the average UFC
I
card
mean, that's
gets
a
now.
while ago. Yeah,
It's a while ago, but that
but the
just
numbers
shows
are significant. Yeah,
if you do it right on a network channel, especially now with no sports coming on, um, or very little, you got sports, but you don't
yeah.
have it's just not the same. I mean, and maybe you put it, maybe you go, hey, Super Bowl weekend, the night before the Super Bowl, since the UFC doesn't do doesn't do their Super Bowl weekend cards anymore. You do the night before the Super Bowl in whatever city the Super Bowl is scheduled for next year. It might be in LA in their new stadium, which would be a perfect situation. You have Brock and Fedor at Staples Center for Bellator on CBS the night before the Super Bowl. And hell, if CBS is carrying the Super Bowl, then all of a sudden, which they might be, I'm not real sure. Then all of a sudden, you've got some potential. So I mean, obviously, that's a lot of ifs, ands, and buts, and,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
everything else. But if you were gonna make a splash, that's how I would do it.
yeah. I mean, I would like Bellator. I mean, I know CBS Sports are trying to build it or whatever, but I mean, I think it would be cool if they just put Bellator events on CBS. I mean, look at who doesn't have CBS. Like, even if you have a freaking antenna out the window, you get channel two or channel two by me. But you know what I mean? It's like, come on, like Why are you always trying to get us to do so? I'm complaining because I don't have CBS Sports, so
Well,
I'm like,
yeah, I don't either, so there'll have to be a workaround for that. But the
yeah,
the we talked when we talked to Cutman Matt last week. He seemed to. I hope he said this on air, but it was that they were leaning towards. Well, we talk outside, but I believe it was
yeah,
where he talked about that they're talking about possibly moving Bellator to Thursday nights again, or a weeknight. Um, so that really doesn't work with CBS per se, because your weekly
yeah, all that
shows
bullshit.
are
Yeah,
yeah. But and I'm not saying I don't think you mean necessarily every show on CBS, although that would be sweet. We don't need necessarily Ben Dayhouse versus Sergio Pettis headlining on CBS. But if every 3 months, if 4 times a year, you get that mega event, you get the Chris Cyborg fight, you get the Fedor fight, you get the Bader, Minikoff, you get, all of a sudden you have your mega fights, 4 times a year on CBS. I think that's the ideal thing. And I mean, it's similar to what the UFC was doing with Fox. It just seems like that relationship just never really kicked off. And I think it was actually the lack of great fights that they put. I mean, they had the Kane Dos Santos one fight was kicked off Fox, and then it seemed like it kind of went downhill from there. And I mean, the only other title fights I recall on Fox were ever Demetrius Johnson fights.
yeah,
And there may have been some other ones. So, but I don't recall anything huge. So I don't know. It's interesting though. Again, we're talking about something that probably won't happen, but
yeah,
in the world where
and,
you
and,
don't
and
know what's
yeah.
going to happen, then why not chat about it?
Well, I mean, speaking of things that might happen, the other kind of big chatter news of today was the Masvidal Diaz 2 kind of happening maybe in January or December or whatever it was. I mean, and I'm seeing. I don't know about you. Well, I guess I do now, but I don't. I see mixed reactions to it, and I mean, if they're trying to do a BMF title rematch, I think they shot their shot out here last November, and I don't know if it's gonna do the numbers they want it to do, but the UFC marketing machine can pull off wonders, but you never know.
Yeah, so the rumor right now is sometime probably in January, which is still a ways off, and would mean that Diaz again hasn't fought doesn't fights once every year and a half basically. I it doesn't do anything for me. There's other fights out there that I would
Yeah,
again.
one of the comments I keep seeing popping up is like, how about Leon Edwards and Masvidal? There's a rivalry there. There's history like that. Like maybe that needs to happen more, and I kind of lean on that side a little bit. But I mean, I do like it when Diaz fights and stuff. I always like the build up. I mean, sometimes some of these fighters and the matchups are more about the build up than the actual fights. Um,
I just
like
feel like it was so
yeah,
one-sided the first fight, and it wasn't like it was. I didn't. It didn't seem like Diaz had anything for him, and maybe it changes in the second fight, but it's not the fight I want to see. The fight I want to see with Masvidal is against Conor McGregor. That's the fight
mm.
that we need. I feel like that's the fight we need to have. And although Masvidal might be big for McGregor, it's just the fight. It's the fight
yeah.
we need to have. It's the fight that would bring excitement to me. I don't get super excited about a lot of these kind of there's so many fights now. It takes something to kind of get a spark going with me, and that's one that
Bruce and Betts looks like they agree with you. I think a lot of people agree with you. I mean,
yeah,
I know I damn sure well do.
and then for Diaz, I'd have to think about it a little more. What are we're fighting Diaz at you know. I know he had a terrible performance this last weekend, but what about like Diaz Robbie Lawler? I mean, I don't know. Maybe does Diaz put enough pressure on Lawler to force him to have to throw his hands and not have to worry about any kind of takedown or grappling? Um, maybe Diaz Wonder Boy. I mean, I just feel like there's some other like potential
Mm,
fun fights out there that maybe don't have the street cred that you would get out of a Masvidal Diaz fight. But um, I mean, I'm all in on McGregor Masvidal. Diaz, like I said, Wonder Boy.
yeah,
Even
I mean,
I don't know. Get
I
Diaz.
think
I don't know.
McGregor's far removed from MMA, though. I mean, every time they bring up, they bring up his name almost at every single post fight press conference, and Dana White keeps saying, as soon as they mention his name, he's like, Conor McGregor's retired. and
But
because only because he said something when he was on Sports Center not so long ago. He said he's like, Conor McGregor's retired because if he's not retired, I have to give him 3 fights a year or I have to pay him. So he says he's retired, he's retired. So I feel like whatever McGregor's doing, it's not going to be MMA. It's probably going to be that Pacquiao thing or something. Or
but a lot of that's talk too, because I mean he's got to say that. We've said it since day one of this pandemic. McGregor's not going to fight in an empty arena.
hmm,
I just don't believe it. I mean, the biggest fight we've really seen in an empty arena was the Cormier Stipe fight, and that still doesn't put anything on a level of what McGregor brings in financially with a gate. I mean, he holds the top two, three, four gates of all time. I mean, you're talking $20 million in gate money, um, and the way that a lot of these other guys get paid, that covers your damn roster for like 3 years, you
yeah.
know. So I just don't see them throwing away that money. And if McGregor fights with no crowd and somebody boat races his ass and smashes his ass into the canvas, that money's gone, or a big chunk of it is gone. I mean, he survived the Khabib thing. Fans still, talk about him, even though he got his ass whooped, and then he did the farce with Cowboy. But there's another one. Why not Cowboy versus Diaz? Didn't they already fought one time? I know Diaz whooped his ass, but there's another one that could potentially be a rematch fight. I just don't want to see. I don't get anything out of Diaz jumping up past all these guys and fighting a guy right now who's really hot in Masvidal, although coming off of a loss to Usman. I just to me the McGregor's the fight to make, but it can't happen. There's no crowds. I mean, that's a fight
Hmm.
essentially you could have done like in a stadium in Ireland, and I don't know what their situation with COVID is. I know some other
I think
countries.
maybe, I mean, because it seemed like from what was the TMZ announcement about the Masvidal Diaz too, and then Brett Okamoto and Helwani kind of like put their 2 cents in and reached out, and it looked like that's when they talked about moving it to January or whatever. But because one thing about Masvidal, without crowds, he proved to be a big business for subscribership, the ESPN Plus and the pay-per-views. So if that can happen in that sense, maybe his name with Diaz again can drum up enough money, because they're both adamant about, we'll fight, you pay us, we'll fight for whatever if the money's right. So
I think it makes money. I mean, Diaz has a loyal fan base. Masvidal's grown a fan base, and it would be a fight that would still be hyped, and they would continue the storyline, acting like the first fight didn't have a conclusive ending, and given it really didn't. But anybody who watches the fights knows how that one was likely to wind down. Um, so I have no doubt that they can make money. I just, as a fan, I don't. It's just not the fight that gets me going. I mean, when I saw it today, I was like, "Oh, this is okay." So if I miss it, if I got a family wedding to go to, it's not going to be like when I'm going to lose sleep over missing. I feel like we saw it. Whereas, like I said, and you know me, I'm not the biggest McGregor fan by any means, but that's just the fight that does it for me. And it seems like that's the fight that a lot of the
oh
fans want.
yeah,
And
yeah,
it just, and I feel like we've gone through this through the history of MMA, where we see guys when they're at like their peak. We saw it when the UFC brought in Crow Cop, and then they gave him Eddie Sanchez and Czech Congo, and then they finally, or they gave him Sanchez, and then okay, well, even though Couture is scheduled to fight around this time, we're going to give him Gonzaga, and we saw how that unfolded, and it
mm,
just seems like so much stuff falls apart. It seems like the everything's aligning now if that's the fight you wanted to do. I mean, hell, I don't care. Make it an MMA fight, and let them box a fight. I mean, I get creative, but both those dudes. I mean, the press conferences alone would be freaking epic,
yeah,
you know. And
yeah.
and we also, and then we got Covington and Woodley coming up in a couple weeks. Masvidal Woodley's or no, I'm sorry. Assuming Covington wins, which I think he will. Covington, if we're gonna go all the way to January, then why not wait and see how that one unfolds? And I mean, Covington and Masvidal have their issues too, and that's more. But I keep skipping over Leon Edwards just because it seems like everybody does, I guess. But um, it's just not the name value. Although a great fight, um, I'm all about the Masvidal McGregor
Yeah,
idea.
no, I'm with you, man. But I don't. I just I'm when you know maybe I just read people really well, but like when I see Dana White's initial like micro expressions every time they mention his name at the press conference, it's like annoying at this point.
Mhm.
It's like, come on, the year's almost over. This dude's not fighting. Stop, like, just forget about it. But you always get some bird in the media that's like, well, what about Conor McGregor? And Dana White's like, he cuts them off, or he responds rather quickly, and he's just like, Conor McGregor's retired, and it's like it's almost like he wants to grab the person and say, haven't you heard? So I want to see it too. I'm not, but I don't
No,
think we're
I
gonna
mean,
see it.
we see it all the time. The other media members out there who will ask, hell, they'll ask John Jones if he's willing to cut to fight McGregor. I mean, these guys, it's McGregor,
Right.
especially the international media, and it's what they know. I mean, I don't. It's clear. It's clear that they're not historians
Yeah.
on the sport. When who was it? Darren Till, was that the one that was kind of funny, where they were like, "What are you ducking McGregor?" Basically, and Till's like, "I'm 40 pounds heavier than the dude. What do you,
Yeah, yeah,
what
yeah,
what
yeah,
what do you mean? Am I ducking him? I'm not going to go for the." It was like, if you win the 170 or 185 belt, are you going to go down and fight him at 155? He's
yeah.
like, so
Yeah,
it's that kind of thing. But
yeah.
I don't know. Like you said, so Usman Burns also is the world title fight that got essentially announced today. UFC
Yeah, it's
256.
in that same TMZ piece, but for somehow the Masvidal Diaz thing seemed to make more news than Usman Burns. I mean, shout out to Gilbert Burns. I want to see that fight a lot.
Yeah, no,
Usman
I
Burns.
mean, it's a fight that makes sense. It's a hardcore fan fight as far as legitimate contender against the world champion, but it certainly is not going to carry any kind of huge buzz. As much as some of those guys can be fun to watch, it's not going to be one that is going to have that train of the hype train behind it. I don't think you're going to see a ton of ESPN pieces on Gilbert Burns and Usman. I mean, it's
Yeah.
just the reality, which is in a sense is sad, because you actually have a champion versus a legit, like, number one contender, which you
Yeah,
don't
yeah.
always get.
Competitive fight, the guys that are familiar with each other already.
Mhm.
I mean, there's a lot of what ifs in that match, and I think especially like you said about Burns being a number one contender, um he's evolved so much as a mixed martial artist from, I mean, and he's still a jiu-jitsu guy because he still competes and stuff, but up until now, obviously being a number one contender, he's probably just focused on MMA. But yeah, man, I mean, I think like that's a fight for the hardcores, you know what I mean? Like, that's a fight for the guys that never miss an MMA event, and they're watching entire sport, not just the UFC. So I mean, yeah, it sucks that it's not as popular as it should be. Kind of dirty that TMZ put those two little snippets together in the same piece, but what are you gonna do?
Yeah, exactly. And the
TMZ, what are you gonna do?
yeah, yeah, exactly. But, well, you mentioned Burns, and Burns always pops into my mind because of his grappling, and we didn't talk about necessarily going over this, but I saw photos and some small little clips from this past weekend's Submission Underground. Did you catch? Um, did you catch that at all?
Yeah, watch the whole thing.
So tell me what happened. I mean, the best you can. Craig Jones, who we've talked about for the last year, being
Hmm.
basically the top food chain, kind of followed Gordon Ryan as far as the lineal pound for pound badass dude in the submission combat, not combat, but you know, submission only um, world of jujitsu and grappling. He lost, right? So he had a controversial loss to the same guy on the previous show, correct?
Yeah,
Kind of a weird stoppage, or the referee. It was just a weird situation, and then he had rematched him, and in overtime he got kind of neck cranked, or
he
what was?
tapped.
Did he
So
tap out?
he's tapped. Just there was no
No
controversy
controversy
this
this
time.
time.
Yeah,
What
it
do you
was
know?
so he had the body triangle super tight. Mason Fowler's got pretty thick legs. He had the body triangle super tight. It was in overtime, and he secured the choking position, but it was Craig Jones's head and arm, but the position was just kind of, it was a crank, but it's one of those things. It's like you have to tap, or you're gonna lose teeth or have vertebrae broken in your neck, and I mean, all he did was in from the body triangle position, pull the top part of Greg Jones's body into him while thrusting the other outward from the body
So
triangle. So
it looked
making
like a lot of pressure on the spine and everything.
and everything. Yeah, it's a super. There's not a lot of people. If you don't tap to that, there's going to be blood and teeth on the mat. Like it's going to be one of those submissions that even if he didn't tap and they moved on to the next because it's positional, the overtime they use the EBI rules. They would have stopped it because of whatever came out of someone's Craig Jones' mouth, most likely because of the discomfort and the pressure from that position. It was legit. Craig Jones didn't argue it this time. There was no arguing. The first time it was almost the same thing, but Jones in trying to escape, he was making noise like grunting or yelling or whatever. I mean, it's one of those things that like when you know, you don't normally hear it when folks are grappling. It can be distracting when you hear it in practice, but I mean, in the rules for submission underground, that if you do make a noise from discomfort, it's considered a verbal tap, and that's where the controversy, because Craig Jones was making noise just trying to fight off the position the way you would make a noise like if you're fighting off a bee or something, you'd be like, oh yeah, like
Yeah,
uh,
yeah.
so he was doing all that, but I mean, so there's controversy over that, which is why they did the immediate rematch. I mean, he gave Fowler Mason Fowler all the props at the end. He shook his hand and said, "Fair and square, you got it." I mean, it's rough. I mean, jiu-jitsu enthusiasts would say stuff like that is dirty, but when it comes to competition, it's like a lot of guys will, you train to hurt opponents, not your training partners. So it's kind of it's one of those things where it's kind of like you got to give Craig Jones did the right thing by there's no when you're coming up like white blue belt, sometimes you have to tell people there's no shame in tapping, and when you go through all those other ranks, there is no shame in tapping. I mean, Craig Jones likely wanted to keep his teeth and his vertebrae and stuff intact, so it was fair and square. But I mean, yeah, that's it. I think they were talking about trying to get Gordon Ryan to face Mason Fowler or something like that, but I know Gordon Ryan has expressed disinterest in the way that submission underground was run the last time he was there. So I don't know. But Chael will throw him some money, make him forget all that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess my biggest beef is I think their matches are too short. I would like to see 8-10 minute fight matches as opposed to the 5 minutes.
Uh,
Just seems really really short.
Maybe I mean I love the pacing. I love the time. Submission on the ground is actually my favorite submission grappling event to watch, and it's probably because they're usually over early enough on a Sunday night where I don't have to be up till like 1 o'clock in the morning for Polaris or the EBIs or things like that.
Maybe
So
maybe just the main events. It just seems like
yeah.
it's if you're gonna have the top level guys in grappling, because it seems like almost every match goes to overtime, and that might be an over exaggeration on my part, but a huge chunk of them seem to go to overtime.
Well, they're
Maybe
really
maybe
good. I mean, there's a lot of really good grapplers, so that's kind of what's going to happen when you have a lot of evenly matched guys. The one thing I do miss that they haven't done is the tag team grappling. Those are just fun to watch. So
Now this Mason Fowler guy did he win didn't they had like a tournament, right? Uh there was like a tournament to fight. The winner of the tournament got to match up against Craig Jones. Did he win
yeah,
that tournament? Is that how he got the first opportunity, or was he?
I think that was yeah they did. I believe so, and I think they did that one it was the Father's Day weekend, so I missed that because I think it was on Father's Day, so I
But
missed that
I
one.
Yeah, so I think that's what they did though, right? They had basically like a 4 or an 8-man Grand
Yeah.
Prix, quote unquote. The winner of that was the Craig Jones match. He got it, won by controversy. Then they gave him a rematch. So really cool story then, if that's how it's unfolded, because I mean, you developed kind of it's kind of the old school UFC tournament thing where you kind of create a superstar by building up a guy, giving him an opportunity. And I mean, obviously, you know him better than I do as a much casual grappling fan. That he's really good at what he does, and obviously he's proven it by beating Craig Jones. But um,
You know what's
interesting.
funny is Mason Fowler had a custom gi made by Tatami, and I feel like he wasn't like that. He wasn't that popular when the gi came out, but I bet you there goes Nolan flexing his biceps. I bet you.
Krispy Kreme curls.
Yeah, I bet you. Whatchamacallit? I bet you folks went and looking for that gi now. You know what I mean? Because like when I remember seeing the Mason Fowler gi onto Tommy's website, and I was like, I don't know that much about him. This was years ago. I think I was a purple belt. I was like, I don't know that much about him. I'm not gonna go buy. It was a nice looking gi, but I was like, I don't want that. You know, like I don't know who that is, but now people know who he is now.
Yeah, I mean, it's a cool story. It'll get me interested. I'll definitely now when I see his name, I'll be one of the guys who tunes in to watch him now because, like you said, it just kind of creates a little bit of buzz and it creates another name. So I think it's cool. But that was on Sunday night. Uh, there was a UFC card on Saturday. I know you missed most of it because it was on the
I saw all the ones on ESPN Red.
yeah, it was on anti-ed ESPN Plus. Was the
And
main
those were really good fights, by the way. The prelims actually, two of those submissions were performance of the night bonus. The Mallory Martin win and the Sean Brady one armed guillotine that I wrote an article about this morning.
both those. Now you bring up the Mallory Martin fight. I mean, my God, that's got to go in the annals as one of the top five. I mean, it's hard to break it down, but let's
Yeah,
say it's one of the best comebacks I've ever seen in MMA history. I mean,
yeah.
she was getting straight. Cyphers was laying down an ass whooping. I mean, there was several times where I thought the referee was going to step in the first round and stop it. Um, Obviously, when you're talking 115-pound women, you don't necessarily have that like crumbling punching power. So it was going to take a combination, and she was able to survive, but easily goes down in the history books. In the second round, she still kind of fought some stuff off, got a takedown, got the submission win. I can't
Yeah,
remember. I mean, that's Darren Elkins, level
yeah,
comeback kind of stuff. So
yeah.
uh,
Yeah, I mean, I don't think she got the performance bonus so much because of the submission she secured. I think it was because of the way she came back after almost pretty much losing the fight. And I mean, she let out that guttural battle cry afterward. That if I was a referee, I would have I would have been like, oh my goodness, and what and like shied away from it if I heard that noise come out of one of the women. But
yeah,
yeah, man, it was a great win for her. That was I wonder because she was away for a while. She had to have like knee surgery or something was up. That's why her knee was wrapped during the fight. And I actually talked about it. If for folks watching, I do a news of the week recap thing with for MMAnews.com called Sunday Submission. And when I talked about that, I mean she had her knee wrapped up, and so I'm wondering if the reason why she didn't fight the way we've seen her fight before was because the cobwebs were are still kind of wearing off, and it took those hits from Cyphers to kind of wake her up, and she came back the Mallory Martin that we know with the how she comes vicious at most of her opponents, and we saw that on Saturday. So yeah, well deserved bonus for her.
yeah. I mean, it kicked the night off too. Night started off with four straight submission
Mm-hmm.
finishes, which is I think it was one off the record. I saw it posted. I can't recall what the record was, but I believe it was five. I just can't remember the event. So, not to go down the whole card, but the top two fights of the evening, Alexander Rakic just manhandles Anthony Smith, leg kicks that were just devastating. Wore Smith down, picked up a unanimous 3-round decision in a rare 3-round main event these days. Smith talking about moving down to middleweight, back to middleweight, where he spent the vast majority of his career. I think that that's a necessity at this point. I think that a lot of the reality will kick in. I mean, he made his run, he got a world championship opportunity, but not to take too much away from him, but he did make his run basically beating guys like Rashad and Shogun. So guys that he could hang with and weren't going to lay on him. Rashad in theory would try to get him down, but um, not so much in 2017, 16, whenever the heck that fight went down.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Co-main event was probably the disappointment of the evening, although Neil Magny looked great and continues adding another win to his uh, total, which is going to start approaching some historic levels here fairly soon. Um, he looked great. Robbie Lawler looked terrible. Uh, Lawler not looked great in his last few fights. Not sure if the fire's gone or what exactly it is, but
I don't think the Ben Askren one counts, but
The
That's
law,
just
yeah,
me.
well, I mean, that was crazy scrap. I mean, you can call it a loss. I just this fight, he has a situation where he seems to, some fights he just doesn't let it go. I mean, the Covington fight wasn't great. The Dos Anjos fight wasn't great. I mean, we're talking he's on a 4 fight losing streak at this
Mm.
point, with his last win being against Cowboy Cerrone, at UFC 214, and that was a real question. I mean, I thought he won, but it was a real close fight. A lot of people were leaning towards Cowboy. And prior to that was coming off of his loss. I mean, since his knockout loss as world champion, he's 1-4. I'm sorry, yeah, he's 1-4. So, um, it's obviously winding down for Robbie, a warrior who's bled in that cage and gave
He's
us.
been fighting since he was like 19.
I
Yeah.
mean, one of the true great entertaining fighters and violent fighters, and I mean everything that a just bleed maniac like me would would love. So, but I just, it hurts not seeing him afraid to throw, or not afraid to throw. I don't want to instigate, not a fear, but just a lack of that killer that. But I think it needs to be brought out of him, and fighting these wrestlers. I mean, he fighting Askren and Covington. I mean, you're talking about guys who are basically trying to grab you. Magny, same way. So it's 3 fights in
Hmm.
a row. Um, that's why I mentioned the Diaz fight is probably something that'll never happen. But the more I think about it, if the way Diaz brings the fight to his opponents, it would really leave Robbie Lawler. Plus, you have the history of uh, of Nick knocking out Robbie in I think it was his second UFC fight, um, back at what, UFC 30 37, I believe. Um, there's a lot of, there's some potential there. So I don't know. Some fun won't happen, but that's just that is this weekend. We get a heavyweight main event. We get the return of Overeem coming off of a big win over Walt Harris, in a real emotional fight for, especially for Harris at the time. But Overeem survived. Again, we talk about the great comebacks, in the heavyweight world where you don't survive many shots. Overeem did that in his last fight, and then was able to outlast Walt Harris. He fights Augusto Sakai, um, big heavyweight, 15-1-1. Um, the rest of the card is there's some action in this card. There are some names, but we're not going to be able to break it down all this week. Um, you know, I'm assuming that, I don't know if you've written down any kind of picks for this card for the main fight, for the main event, but you know, for me, it's always Overeem. Um, gonna ride and die with that until his career comes to an end. Um, you see anything in that fight that jumps out at you, or anything at all?
No, I mean it's hard. Like I said, I mean we were talking about it before we went live here, but I mean it is an all ESPN Plus card, so I kind of don't give a shit about it. But if I have to pick one, I'm gonna pick. I'm gonna pick. It's hard not to pick against Overeem. Overeem's always that guy that you know. Even when you want to pick against him, he'll upset you. You know what I mean? Um, his experience, he's still definitely got a lot of power. It's hard to pick against him. I haven't really researched the card yet, as I said. I mean, I do have to look at it because of all the places I write for, and I'll probably catch some highlights if it pops on ESPN. Sometimes they throw the whole thing on ESPN too late at night, and I record it and watch it. But with some sports, some of these stick and ball sports returning, that's not happening as much as it was when they were on their break or their whatever they were doing. So, um, yeah.
Well, the interesting thing with Overeem is, I mean, he had the Rosenstruck, um, lost. He was dominating, basically sweeping all the cards up until 4 seconds left in the fight, and he got KO'd. If
Mhm.
that fight lasts four more seconds, we're looking at a dude who's on a 4 fight win streak in the heavyweight division, looking for number five. Now, given he probably wouldn't have fought Walt Harris, and he wouldn't be fighting Sakai if had he not lost that fight, most likely. But we're in a world where the heavyweight division is kind of, with Cormier stepping out. I mean, John Jones versus Overeem's a fun fight too. I mean, I don't think anybody's ever mentioned that fight, but You start to get to the point where, especially an older dude coming down his career, really seems like it puts him like one fight away. I mean, a big win over any of those top 3, 4 heavyweights. Although he's lost to Blades and Ngannou, perhaps a rematch down the line with either of those guys, or
I
a
feel
win.
like, I mean, this whole John Jones at heavyweight thing, and I know we talked about it when he first made the noise about it, but there's just something I don't for. I know he wants to test himself. Maybe he sees more money there, or whatever the case may be. I feel like that's where he's going to get his true first loss at heavyweight.
Oh, I do too. I
Yeah.
think it's a totally different world, and I don't. I mean, I think there's a reason why John Jones hasn't jumped to heavyweight until now. I
Hmm.
mean, if he thought he could be the world heavyweight champion, you would have been the world heavyweight champion. Everybody wants to be the world heavyweight champion. The baddest man on the planet is the world heavyweight champion. I mean,
Yeah.
that's what they call Stipe now. And although Jones is arguably the greatest mixed martial artist of all time, um, he's never been considered the baddest man on the planet. That's just a label that has been always been the heavyweight boxing champion.
Yeah.
Always,
Yeah.
I mean, so
It's
there's
always the
that.
heavyweight champion of the world is the guy.
Is,
Yeah.
you might not be pound for pound, but you're the biggest, baddest dude on the planet,
Yeah.
according to the records, according to the championship belt, according to the casual walker of this planet who watches combat sports. It's always the biggest, baddest dude. So, um, anyways, I mean, I'd love to see Overeem make one more little run here, win 2 or 3 more fights in a row, and perhaps we end up with a chance at some kind of one final finale before he eventually calls it quits. But um, that's this weekend. Like you said, all ESPN Plus card right now. Anything can change. It could end up getting transferred to ESPN. It all depends on, I imagine, what's going on with all these other sports
The
and
more popular basketball and baseball, whatever the hell else is going on this weekend. Is Labor Day weekend a big baseball weekend? You would know better than me. I don't really follow baseball.
Well, I mean,
Or
historically, I mean, I wouldn't say a big weekend, but if the baseball season had started on time, we would be
Mhm.
you'd be looking at like this would be what it'd begin down to the final couple weeks of the season. We'd be
Mm.
winding down September, October. I mean, we'd be coming to the end. It would essentially be where we'd be winding down and playing the last couple games and figuring out who's going to go to the playoffs. So it's all different right now. You got the NFL kicking off in a week and a half, so that's going to be another thing that'll especially take up a lot of ESPN news and space is going to be the NFL. So UFC likely will continue to kind of get pushed away, which sucks because they made the move in this pandemic and have been there. Um, Neither of us have been a fan of this ESPN Plus thing, really. I mean, I'm a subscriber; I watch it. It's but I get your protest of it. Um, I don't have half the stuff that I used to have as far as streaming uh, events. So again, a UFC this weekend. Hopefully, we'll be back next week, potentially with a guest, and we'll maybe have the chance to also talk the Bellator doubleheader that will hit on September 11th. Patrick Mix, Archuleta, um, the big fight of that weekend. Um, but until then, fans can follow us at Combat Hour on Twitter, Coast to Coast Combat Hour on Instagram. Follow me at MMA Hawk 21 on Twitter and Instagram. Follow Ed at Carbizol on Twitter, Carbirzol on Instagram, Old Head Ed on Twitch. Old Head Carb on Twitch. One of these weeks I'll get it right. Old Head Carb on Twitch. And then check us out on our podcast page at allaccessmma.com. Thanks to Jacob for what he does over there and helping promote this website or this podcast. Um, until next weekend, man. Have a good week and enjoy your Labor Day as best you can, brother.
You too, man. We'll see you next week.